Michael Ajayi has 9 days to decide if he's coming to Gonzaga or staying in the NBA draft process. If he ends up in Spokane, does Mark Few have a national championship caliber team?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Well, folks, it is a post-NBA draft combine mailbag edition of the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll talk Michael Ajayi, how he did at the combine, what it means for him. We got a handful of other fantastic topics and questions. If you want to get involved in Mailbag Monday, the best and easiest way to do so is to join our Discord channel. There's a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. It is free to join. There's about 350 folks in there chatting about Gonzaga basketball literally every day, whether it's talking about the women's basketball team, the Zags baseball team, whether we're talking Andrew Nembhard dropping 20 points to lead the Indiana Pacers over the New York Knicks. Every Gonzaga topic, we're talking about it on the Discord channel. So join there. There's a mailbag questions spot you can join, and you can ask your questions there. All right, let's get right into it. This first question comes from Dawson via Discord. Dawson says, assuming Ajayi comes to Gonzaga, how do you like our odds at a national championship? We're so deep this year. We're going to get into the Ajayi part of the conversation in the second question here, but yeah, it's really hard to not be excited about what this team looks like right now. For the first time, the last couple of years, Gonzaga has been very good. Do not get me wrong, but it hasn't quite felt like they've had a fully championship caliber roster. Last year's team started out really weak, and there was concern about even making the tournament. Obviously, that got put to rest by February, and that team looked really good after that. But this year's team, with a ton of continuity from last year, returning 4 of 5 starters from, again, a team that looked really good in the second half of the year. You bring 4 of those 5 starters back. You replace Anton Watson with Michael Ajayi. Again, if we're operating under that assumption, Ajayi is a great fit. He's not quite as good defensively, or at least not expected to be as good defensively as Watson. I think trying to judge how good Ajayi is defensively is tough because Pepperdine plays bad defense. And so he was not in a system that was particularly advantageous for him. But the big difference for Gonzaga is less about the starting lineup. It's about the depth. Adding a player like Caleb Battle, who is a huge addition, a go-to scorer coming off the bench, something last year's Gonzaga team did not have. 2 years ago, they had Malachi Smith, but they had issues in the starting lineup that kind of prevented them from reaching that threshold that they needed to get to. Last year's team had a better point guard in Ryan Nembhard, had Nolan Hickman in a better role, but they didn't have that third guard coming off the bench. This year's team will have that. They'll have Nembhard in a role now where he's even more comfortable, having already been here for a full season. They'll have Nolan Hickman after a full season of playing that off-guard role. Then they also add in Caleb Battle. And then you add in a guy like Emmanuel Inocente, who I don't think is going to be a big contributor, but you just have depth in the backcourt that you did not have previously. And then you had the front court looks more or less the same. Ben Gregg and Graham Ike are going to start. They're going to be fantastic. I think the versions of those 2 players we saw in the second half of last year, if you see that for a full season, you're in great shape. And then after all of that, that already sounds like a championship, or at least like Sweet 16, Elite 8 type of team. You factor in the return of Steele Venters, desperately needed outside shooting, joining this roster after missing last year with the injury. Braden Huff's going to be better than he was last year because he's going to have had a full year of experience under his belt. So will Dusty Stromer. He will be better than he was last year as well. Those 2 guys taking sophomore leaps, in Huff's case, a redshirt sophomore leap, Venters being healthy, Ajayi being in the mix. If all goes to plan, if Ajayi returns, if everybody's healthy, this team is absolutely national championship caliber. Absolutely. I have no debate. That doesn't mean they're going to win it. Never does. But they are absolutely at the level of the teams in Gonzaga's history, like 2017 and 2021, that had national championship caliber rosters and actually went to the national championship. This team is on that level if everybody is healthy and back. and I believe that they will significantly move in the direction of potentially being a national championship team this year. Next question here, again, sticking with Ajayi. This one comes from Pete via Gmail. You can also ask questions, andypatton013@gmail.com if you want to get your mailbag questions answered that way. Pete says, despite fine performances in the NBA Combine scrimmages, in addition to having a 7'0" 0.75 wingspan, Ajayi does not appear to have moved up significantly on the mock draft boards. The highest he has risen is 80th overall on the NBA draft website, while being listed as 16th out of 18 scoring forwards. What is your feeling now at the conclusion of the Combine about the likelihood of Ajayi playing for Gonzaga next season? Okay, first of all, I disregard the mock drafts. Mock drafts written right at the end of the Combine, I would take that with a grain of salt. I'd take most mock drafts with a grain of salt, period. Some mock drafts are written by scouts or people who work directly with front offices, and in those situations, they're probably more in tune with which players teams are actually looking at versus, maybe guys that a lot of trendier like online scouts really love, but maybe aren't actually getting that attention from NBA scouts. However, the people who are plugged in with scouts and general managers and agents are also kind of carrying water for them as well. So it's always hard to kind of know what you're getting with those mock drafts. Having said all of that, yes, Michael Ajayi, while he performed well, didn't dramatically increase his draft stock from the general consensus. That's what the general consensus is. And I think it's pretty simple. What scouts want to see from Michael Ajayi is the ability to consistently perform well against higher quality opponents. And obviously Pepperdine played Gonzaga. They played the rest of the teams in the WCC that Gonzaga also played, like San Francisco and St. Mary's and so on. And he's going to play those same teams next year. But he's also going to play UConn. He's also going to play UCLA. He's also going to play Washington. He's also going to play 3 games in the Battle for Atlantis that are going to be great. And he's also going to play in the NCAA tournament. He's going to get that opportunity that he wasn't going to get at Pepperdine. And that amount of data that scouts and general managers and analysts and whomever will get about Michael Ajayi is more valuable than what he did at Pepperdine last year when he didn't perform very well against the best teams. He didn't do great against St. Mary's. He didn't do great against Gonzaga. He didn't get a lot of marquee non-conference opportunities, and he didn't play the NCAA tournament. He gets all that at Gonzaga. So my assumption, I don't know what exactly has been said to him, but my assumption is people are saying, hey, you looked great. We were very impressed by your size, by your length, by your athleticism, by your outside shooting, some of the skills he displayed. I think a lot of his performances in those combines, you could see it if you watch the clips. Theo Lawson posted a handful of clips. A lot of what he did was in the fourth quarter in like a 22-point margin of victory. He was going out there and getting buckets. That's great, but I think scouts really want to see what he can do in marquee games against marquee opponents at this level. He just hasn't proven that yet. And there was nothing he could really do at the Combine that would elevate that. There just wasn't. And the case in point is that he did do well. He measured well. That was a huge thing for him. If he measured 6'7" with a 6'7" wingspan, that was going to seriously knock him. He might have already said he was coming back. But the fact that his wingspan was long, the fact that his testing was good, has him still in this conversation. But at the end of the day, I would be very surprised if he is getting information indicating that he is a surefire lock to be drafted. And my guess is enough people are going to tell him, hey, we think you have a real opportunity to be an NBA draft pick. If you go back to Gonzaga, you show us the 3-point shooting skills, you play in an NBA style offense, et cetera, we think that that's a better opportunity for you. My guess is he's hearing that, and that's the decision he's going to make. He's got 9 days from today to make that call. But that is what I think is going to happen. It has not changed. I have continued to believe that is the most likely outcome. I also think Gonzaga is intentionally hedging their bet a little bit by going out and getting a Caliph Battle and an Emmanuel Inchente who can fill a role that if he were to leave, they have options to kind of fill that spot. They're preparing in case he does, but I think the expectation remains that he will be in Spokane next season. Final question, the first segment, comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, who is the best NBA prospect for this Gonzaga team? Is it Battle or Ajayi or somebody else? And is it possible that Ajayi or Battle or both could end up coming off the bench next year? Yeah, Caliph Battle's coming off the bench. That is like pretty much ironclad definitive, unless Ajayi doesn't come back. And I think even then, if Ajayi stays in the draft process, I think it's likely that either Venters or Stromer, Venters would have to be healthy, would step into that starting lineup instead, and Battle would still come off the bench. But it's possible Gonzaga would say, let's just play our best players. We're going to put Battle in the starting lineup and play a 3-guard lineup consistently next year. But if Ajayi is back, Battle comes off the bench, and Ajayi starts, I would be stunned, legitimately stunned, if Gonzaga did not start Michael Ajayi next season. That would be very, I don't know why they wouldn't do that. He's a very logical player in that lineup alongside your 4 returners in Nembhard, Hickman, Greg, and Ike. Ajayi fits perfectly. He's the right size. He's the right skill set, the wing, the 3-point shooting, the ability to attack the basket. Like, he's a perfect, and that's not to say Steel Venters would be bad, or that Dusty Stromer would be bad as a starter, or even Caleb Battle. They all would work. That's why this team is so good, is they have so much depth. But no, I think Battle comes off the bench and Ajayi starts, and I feel very confident about those two things. In terms of draft prospects, assuming Michael Ajayi returns, he becomes the best draft prospect on Gonzaga's roster next season. Not even particularly close, to be honest. I don't think Caleb Battle is second. I'm not sure Caleb Battle is a particularly notable NBA draft prospect. And I don't really like knocking the guy before he's even played for Gonzaga, but ultimately he's a 6'5" guard. He's skinny, and he's not a point guard. He's not at all a point guard. He has more turnovers than assists in his career. Consistently every year, he has demonstrated that he is a he's an off-ball guard. He is not a point guard. And that's fine. Gonzaga's not asking him to be a point guard. He's going to be great at the role that Gonzaga's asking him to do. But at the NBA level, skinny 6'5" guards who can't play point guard they're kind of a dime a dozen. You can find those guys pretty easily. So many great Gonzaga players have been undersized non-point guards, and they haven't really gotten significant looks in the NBA. Malachi Smith, Joel Ajayi. I got to mix them up with Ajayi and Ajayi now. Joel Ajayi, not an NBA. He played like a few games in the NBA. Malachi Smith didn't make the NBA. Rasir Bolton didn't make the NBA. Like, the list goes on and on and on of really good non-point guards coming out of Gonzaga. And I think Battle will just be the next in that list. If we're talking NBA prospects on Gonzaga's roster that are not Michael Ajayi, the next ones are probably Ben Gregg and Braden Huff, because they offer what modern NBA teams want out of their bigs. Ben Gregg is a 38% consistent 3-point shooter. He's a tough physical player. He's gotten a lot stronger. He's still an undersized big at the next level, and I'm not sure he's going to get a ton of NBA love, but he projects to be what NBA teams are looking for. Braden Huff has a lot of development still to do, particularly on the defensive end of the floor. But if he can become a consistent 38, 40% 3-point shooter with at least enough capability to score around the rim and defending in space and defending around the rim, he's got work to do. But as a prospect, he's absolutely there. I think those guys are both ahead of Caleb Battle, with Ajayi at the top. And then Dusty Stromer, he's just got a lot of projections still to do, but maybe he could climb his way into that conversation as well. Well, is there a travel partner that could make sense to join the Big East with Gonzaga? Plus, why are there so few true home-and-home matchups anymore? We're going to talk about both of those things in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster. And folks, they do it for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. They help you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a job, but might be open to the perfect role. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So folks, if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also constantly finding ways to make this process even easier, like launching a feature that helps you write job descriptions, which makes that process easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are continuing through Mailbag Monday here on the show. This next question comes from Grand Chef Otto on Discord, who says, sorry to eat a bread horse here regarding the Big East, but I keep hearing that the move could be more feasible if Gonzaga had a travel partner. Which WCC team would make the most sense to make that leap with us? St. Mary's might be too small, but what about Santa Clara, San Francisco, Seattle? Okay, first of all, love the phrase eat a red horse. That is hilarious. I've never heard that before. 2, I am a daily podcast talking about Gonzaga basketball. If I'm not eating a bread horse, I'm like, what am I doing? We're going to continue to talk about a lot of similar topics throughout the offseason. So don't ever feel bad about asking questions about things we've already talked about. That is part of the dealio here. I love talking about these conversations. I love, in particular, talking about the Big East. It's one of my favorite topics. Having said that, The Big East doesn't want any other school in the WCC. I'm not speaking directly for Val Ackerman, the commissioner, but I feel pretty confident in saying that the only school Gonzaga, or the only school the Big East has any even modicum of interest in on the West Coast, on the west half of the United States, basically, is Gonzaga. The other WCC schools are not there. St. Mary's is the best basketball school in terms of consistent, regular success, but they are such a tiny institution. They have such a small athletic budget that it makes no sense to add them to the Big East. Not a knock on St. Mary's. It's just a fact. I mean, it's unfortunately negative for St. Mary's, but it is a fact. They have a smaller athletic budget than Seattle U, who incidentally has a even less chance than St. Mary's of going to the Big East. Santa Clara and San Francisco are the slightly more likely chances, but I put them at still well less than 1% that the Big East would ever seriously consider them. San Francisco is in a major media market. Obviously, Santa Clara is very close by as well, but in a major media market, it's a decent-sized school. They've had more success basketball-wise. This applies to both Santa Clara and San Francisco, but they're still not there. They're still not there. I don't think the Big East wants anybody in the WCC outside of Gonzaga. And that is a problem. If a travel partner is an issue, I don't think they're just going to take a school just to take a school. They're not that desperate to add Gonzaga that they're like, fine, we'll take San Francisco along for the ride. I don't see that happening. Or Grand Canyon, who doesn't make sense in a lot of ways as well. The more logical other additions alongside Gonzaga just aren't great geographic travel partner fits. It would be like Dayton out of the A10, or St. Louis also in the A10. Programs like that might make sense. But again, if Gonzaga's travel partner is in Dayton, Ohio, like that's still just not a geographic fit. It's the biggest, really, really big hurdle that is preventing Gonzaga from being a logical addition to the Big East. Everything else makes a ton of sense, but the travel partner, the travel logistics is just a hurdle that I sincerely hope is not insurmountable, but it is tough to see how it's going to work. And a travel partner, while I can see why it would be a solid solution, there's just not really a feasible option right now for this conversation. Next question here comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, what is the deal with the large volume of neutral court games? I'm delighted that the games are being played, but at the same time, they couldn't get any of these games in home-and-home situations, while Gonzaga can clearly get almost any game they want, with several conferences playing more and more conference games each year around these crazy geography setups. Could it be that big-time non-conference neutral court games is going to be the wave of the future? Yeah, Jeff, my friend, I think it already is. We are seeing a lot fewer true home-and-home series being scheduled. And it's not just Gonzaga. Many other places are doing the same thing. You're seeing a lot of games being played in NBA arenas when they do these neutral site games. You know, UCLA or USC will take teams to, well, in the case of UCLA, they're taking Gonzaga to the new LA Clippers Stadium. We've seen neutral site games be scheduled at that new arena in South Dakota. That's name is escaping me right now, but we're seeing a lot of like Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indiana hosted, I think, Purdue for a non-conference game this year. Maybe that was Purdue, Arizona. I don't remember the exact game. Obviously, Madison Square Garden, which is the pseudo home for St. John's, but like we are seeing teams play more neutral site games. And it's money. It's always money. It is always money. Teams don't want to come to Gonzaga and play at the McCarthy Athletic Center, where they are A, more likely to lose, and B, they will make less money. There is less ticket revenue to be made at the McCarthy Athletic Center than there is at the Spokane Arena, and much less than there is at Climate Pledge. And Mark Few, I'm sure they want more games in Spokane. I don't think Mark Few is like, oh yeah, you want to play in Spokane? Now let's just go play in Seattle. Like if they're wanting to come to Spokane, he wants to play it there too, because he knows he's going to win if he plays that game there. But I don't think that, I think that Mark Few is just having to do whatever he has to do to get these games. And in these situations, these teams want money. They want opportunities to get their players in these big-time arenas, and it's not happening for Gonzaga at the Kennel, so they have to schedule them at Climate Pledge or like the return games in Madison Square Garden or in various other arenas. And I don't think that's going to change. It's happening around the rest of college basketball. I think it's going to be the wave of the future. And like I said, it's kind of already is the future. It's a bummer. I'd like to see more games at the Kennel. I'd love it when North Carolina was there, when Texas was there. That's awesome. But I wouldn't hold my breath that that's going to happen much, if at all, going forward. Final question of the segment comes from Grandpa Zag on Discord, who says, international players can't work in the U.S., so they can't participate in NIL. Since blue blood schools can attract big NIL players, do you see five-star foreign players migrating to mid-majors or smaller schools that can't support a strong NIL program for more playing time? Well, it's a bit more complicated than that for a couple of reasons. One, yes, technically international student athletes cannot earn NIL money the same way that U.S.-born student athletes can. But that doesn't mean that they are incapable of making any money in college, and it's complicated. And if I don't know exactly all the details, but I know that even international student athletes at Gonzaga, there are ways for them to profit legally. It's not shady. It's not happening in ways that are not allowed. They're just, it's different. It's different. And my suspicion is that the high major programs can still probably offer more money to some of those international student athletes than the lower major ones. But beyond that, like, I don't see why, like, if the international students can't make money in this situation, which again is not entirely true, then they're still going to go to the best programs. Like if Kentucky offers a player an opportunity to come there and start and play in Lexington and, be the star player for Kentucky, why would a player not go there as opposed to going to, Dayton or, Loyola Chicago or, a smaller school like that? Like, you're still going to go to the bigger school because the money doesn't really matter. And if I'm Kentucky or Duke or North Carolina and I have an opportunity to get a really talented international player to start for my team and I don't have to pay him as much, that's a win-win. So I don't see the high major programs neglecting the top international talent, and I don't see why the top international talent would intentionally not go to those programs. It doesn't really make sense. Obviously, playing time becomes a factor, and international players are maybe more in tune to finding a program fit as opposed to just going and chasing the highest amount of money. And in that regard, I suppose that is true, but there are already kind of select programs that really maximize international. Certain programs just don't do it. And I don't know of any off the top of my head specifically, and I don't want to name a program and have people say, oh, they actually do. But like there are a lot of programs that rarely, if ever, touch international students, whereas the programs like Gonzaga and Arizona and UCLA, they are more likely to go add the international players. So I don't think that is really going to change. The teams that like to recruit internationally are going to continue to recruit internationally. The teams that don't. And I don't know that NIL is going to have a huge determining factor in that going forward. Well, folks, is Gonzaga set up to have the #1 offense in the entire country next season? And is that even what the Zags should be aiming for? More on all of that in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, it is playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Just like we said, Andrew Nembhard willed the Indiana Pacers to a victory over the New York Knicks in Game 7. Baseball is also in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether your first bet is a win or a loss. So bet on everything, from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And folks, Gonzaga right now, they are at plus 1,800 to win the national championship in 2025. At the end of the 2024 season, they were at plus 3,000. So if you want to maximize your profit, take advantage of the longest odds that you can, you got to get in right now. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show today with a handful more mailbag questions here on Mailbag Monday. These next two come from Austin via the Discord channel. Austin says, based on the current roster, this team looks really, really good offensively. Do you think this team will be good enough to clinch the #1 offensive ranking in KenPom? Yes, I do. Doesn't mean that they will, but I think that they are certainly capable of it. They've done it before. Mark Few's teams are frequently in the top 10, top 5 in offensive efficiency at KenPom. Mark Few is an offensive guru. And he's excellent at finding players that fit his style and his pace and what he wants to do offensively. Part of the reason for that is because the players who do fit that system tend to have massive success, not only at Gonzaga, but moving on professionally as well. Think Andrew Nembhard, Jalen Suggs, Chet Holmgren for like the high-profile recruits, Corey Kispert. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Rui Hachimura, et cetera. They're putting guys in the league. They're putting together top 10, top 5 offenses in the country, and they're able to find players that fit this system. Everything that is the history for Gonzaga in that regard is the plan for this upcoming season. 4 of the 5 starters returned from a team that was very efficient last year, particularly in the second half of the year when guys like Nembhard and Ike found their roles. You add in a high-octane offensive guard in Caliph Battle, dude who dropped a 40-burger against Vanderbilt last year. You add in a guy who averaged 17.5 points per game last year for Pepperdine and Michael Ajayi. You get back Steele Venters, who's a highly efficient three-point shooter, a guy I think conceivably, depending on his role, could shoot something like 45% for Gonzaga next year. I think that's very much within the realm of possibility for him as a three-point shooter. I absolutely think Gonzaga's combination of veteran players, returners, newcomers, depth, puts them in a position to be a leading candidate to be the number one offense in the country. If Alabama gets Mark Steers back, it's going to be hard to beat them. That team was really good offensively last year. Illinois was a top team offensively last year as well. They keep a lot of key pieces, but they also lose some key pieces. Terrence Shannon Jr. is gone. Coleman Hawkins enters the transfer portal. UConn, very hard to know what they're going to look like. They were obviously an elite offensive team last year, but they lose the majority of their starting lineup, potentially all five if Alex Caravan stays in the draft process. So it's hard to know what with some of these teams. I think Kansas is going to be in this conversation. Unquestionably, Zeke Mayo from South Dakota State, AJ Storr from Wisconsin are monster additions for a team that keeps Hunter Dickinson and KJ Adams and DeJuan Harris. So there are a lot of teams that are going to be in this conversation. Gonzaga is clearly one of them, and it frankly wouldn't surprise me at all if they finish the season number one in KenPom's offensive efficiency. Austin goes on, he says, if you had to choose between the number one team in offense and a top 50 defense or the number one team in defense and top 50 in offense, what would it be? Here's the deal, Austin. 21 of the past 24 NCAA champions were top 10 in offensive efficiency at KenPom. However, all 24 were top 22 in defensive efficiency. If you are not a top 25 defensive team in KenPom's efficiency numbers, you are not going to win a national championship. Having said this, this is data at the end of the year. So if you come into the tournament 31st in defensive efficiency, and then you just put the clamps on teams for 6 straight games and you climb all the way into the top 22, that would still count. Same on the offensive side. But ultimately, there's a reason the phrase is defense wins championships. If I had to pick, I would probably pick defense in terms of Gonzaga trying to win a championship. But aesthetically, I would way rather root for a team that is number one in offensive efficiency. Way rather. You guys have watched St. Mary's. Did any of you watch Iowa State last year? Great team, great defensive team, kind of a chore to watch. St. Mary's, historically, an incredible chore to watch. Virginia, now last year they were bad offensively. Historically, they've actually been a very good offensive team in terms of efficiency, but the pace and the style, I mean, they're known for their defense, and it's a tough watch. I love that we get to watch a Gonzaga team that on any given night could drop 100. I love it. I love it. It is so much fun to watch this Gonzaga team. So yeah, from an aesthetic perspective, I would way rather watch the number one offensive team in the country because they just put up hundo frequently. But to win a championship, you got to be at least in that top 25 defensively. Final question of the show here comes from Ted Z on Discord, who says, which NBA team has the most Gonzaga in them? I don't know how to take this question, Ted, so I'm going to try to do it a couple of different ways. First of all, no team has more than one Zag on the roster. That's historically not always been the case. Obviously, Rui and Corey Kispert were teammates with the Wizards. There have been a handful of other opportunities or times. Brandon Clark and Killian Tilly were teammates together with the Memphis Grizzlies, for example. Like, there have been teammates in the past, but right now there are not. So there 10 teams are at least 1 point Zags because they have one Zag player on the roster. In terms of like a team that seems the most like Gonzaga, I would kind of venture that would be a team that has been consistently really, really good that is in a smaller market because Gonzaga being in the mid-major ranks, I think kind of is the equivalent there. So you're talking like maybe the Spurs, but the Spurs have won a bunch of championships. Gonzaga obviously has not been able to do that. The Pacers, they're on the brain right now because they just went to the Eastern Conference Finals after taking down the New York Knicks, thanks to Andrew Nembhard dropping 20 points. The Pacers have been very good. They are consistently a playoff team, but they don't really break through for that championship. So maybe the Pacers are the squad. OKC, I know that's not going to be super popular. I know there are a whole bunch of Gonzaga fans who will never root for Oklahoma City because they are the former Seattle Supersonics, of course. I get it. I'm a Blazers fan, so I don't have as much of a dog in the fight there. But Oklahoma City, even including Seattle's history, they're always good. They're rarely have they been bad. Seattle was very good franchise. Oklahoma City has been good the majority of the time they've been a franchise. Their championship was in the 70s, but they've been consistently good. Now they're led by Chet Holmgren. They're in a really hot spot lately. A lot of their success has been more recent. That's kind of an equivalent to Gonzaga in some ways. I was going to throw Portland out here as well. Portland for a while had the longest streak of consecutive playoff appearances, while Gonzaga has, one of the longest streaks of NCAA tournament appearances. So I think in that regard, it kind of makes some sense. Portland also only has one championship, and it was way back in the 1970s. So Portland, Oklahoma City kind of feel like the potential options there in terms of kind of what team is most similar to Gonzaga at the next level. Hope that answers your question, Ted. That's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Reminder to join our Discord channel if you have not done so yet. We'll be back this week. More conversation about conference realignment, more conversation about the teams joining the WCC in 2025. We're also going to continue to monitor Michael Ajayi, monitor Andrew Nembhard and Julian Strother in the NBA playoffs. Keep you up to date on all of that. Thank you for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.